origins of the Tibetan Book of the Dead are unknown. According to legend, this sacred text was written by the great Indian tantric yogi Padmasambhava, who crossed the Himalayas in the 8th century and brought Buddhism to Tibet. Padma, as I call him, then concealed the book inside a hollow pillar in the Samye monastery. For centuries, the tradition of the Book of the Dead was passed down via the oral tradition, and the scripture was recited aloud to the dying to help them attain samsara, liberation from rebirth. The Book of the Dead guides a person to use the moment of death to recognize the nature of the mind. And for those spiritually advanced enough who can perceive the Buddhas who appear during the various phases of death, these Buddhas are willing to install us in their mandalas, in their many different Buddha realms. The book teaches how one can attain these heavenly realms by recognizing the enlightenment, enlightened realms, as opposed to being drawn into the dream realms of seduction that pull the surviving mind or awareness into the cyclic suffering of rebirth. The unevolved soul, mind, awareness, whatever you want to call it, pines for the pleasures of the flesh and draws closer to the physical or material world. Sexual fantasies attract it towards couples making love, or even animals copulating, depending on its karmic destiny. And it is then trapped in the womb for another incarnation. Now, in the 14th century, Karma Lingpa, the great Tibetan discoverer of spiritual treasures, according to legend, he's led by the mystic Dakanis, remember they're angelic beings, to the exact right place where the text was hidden for centuries. This happens about 600 years later. Now, Karma Lingpa then realizes, then publishes the sacred text, and even writes commentaries on it. Now, in 1927, Walter Yearling Evans Wentz, a Quaker, spiritualist and theosophist from Trenton, New Jersey, who's also a pioneer in revealing and interpreting Tibetan Buddhism to the Western world, meets a Lama named Kazi Dawa Samdup, and together they decide to translate the text into English from a totally unknown manuscript that Wentz picks up in a Darjeeling bazaar. W.Y. Evans Wentz traveled the globe for nearly 30 years, never spending more than just a few weeks in any given place. He was born into and kept a strong dissatisfaction with the established Western religions. And he translated other Tibetan texts, for example, on Milarepa, also on yoga, and several sacred Tibetan doctrines. It is Wentz who gives the sacred texts its English name. He's the one that first calls it the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Its original title is the Bardo Tudoral, which translates to the Book of Natural Liberation, through learning in the between state. The Bardo, for those of you who do not know, is a type of intermediate state of being between death and rebirth. The Bardo Tudoral, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, grew out of the learning of the great Indian Tibetan adepts of the Tantra, or esoteric occult Buddhism. The Tantrics carefully and experimentally studied the process of dying and being reborn, and over centuries developed the ability to maintain awareness through the various phases of transition. To the Tibetans, death is a type of opportunity, a joyful release into a new embodiment. It's a release into further spiritual development. To the Tibetans, no one is really dead. Death is simply a doorway into further existence. Our mind, our soul, our awareness continues on. When we die, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we melt into a type of internal heap or puddle. The hardness in our systems is lost, and our vision begins to melt into a type of hallucinatory mirage that becomes a swirling fluid pattern. We lose our ability to see, and also lose our connection to form. Following death, the instant of death, the moment of death, the soul, the mind, our awareness is freed. But it's also faced with the possibility of being absorbed into the Godhead. For the average person, this possibility is, terrifying. So the soul, the mind, the awareness, whatever you want to call it, flees from the Godhead through a succession of dream worlds in which the environment is, unconsciously created by the expectations of our soul, our mind, our awareness itself. The person experiencing death creates his or own reality, just like that of a dream.